Welcome to the Busy Latter-day Saint, where righteous desires and living come together. Here, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints discuss their challenges and successes in studying the Scriptures. I'm your host, Richard Bernard. The music for this program is by Marvin Goldstein and used with his permission. If you've enjoyed this podcast, I encourage you to leave a comment regarding this episode or the podcast in general. To leave a comment, go to Love the Podcast, that's all one word, lovethepodcast.com/B as in boy, LDS, or you can click on the link in the show notes. World traveler, author, managing editor for The Third Hour, and a Jewish convert to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Gail Boyd offers a wide range of experiences that interweaves throughout our conversation as we discuss the Old Testament, Israel, Judaism, the attributes of Christ, and the Scriptures. You will find this episode a delightful trip down the road of discovery to a deeper understanding of the Scriptures. Now, here's Gail. Well, Gail, welcome. How are you doing?
Pretty good.
Good. Well, I'm here in your home. It's a lovely home, and got to meet your cat. So it's wonderful to be with you, and we've got a lot of things in common we're going to be talking about here.
Super.
But let's talk about your family first. You are married and you have 6 children.
Correct.
Where are they all located?
I have one in Australia, one in Jordan, and 4 in Utah right now. That will always change. It's always on the verge of changing.
And the one that's in Australia, they there forever or just?
No, should be a few more years, and then I think their next stop is Geneva.
Geneva. Well, what do they do?
It's international business.
Oh, an international business.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
We lived abroad for about 14 and a half years, and so our children are really oriented towards global living, and so they're either out of the United States or wishing they were out of the United States.
Well, now I think you said you've been at 34 different homes, something like that?
Not quite, but a lot. We have always moved often, and our kids are fine with that too. So we have a couple of stayed put because of their spouses, but the others are fine with moving around.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I saw somewhere, as I did some research on you, that your favorite place is someplace else.
Right. It's really funny. After you experience all of these different cultures, they each have distinct holidays and distinct traditions and distinct foods. You're just homesick for somewhere all the time. But it's never the place you're in. So if somebody mentions one of the countries we've lived in, then I get homesick and hungry at the same time.
Oh. Well, now, you are a Jewish convert to the church.
Correct.
How long ago was that?
I converted to the church when I was 16. My parents are both Jewish, and in fact, I had my DNA done on Ancestry, and I have a pie chart that's all one color.
Oh.
I am 100% European Jewish.
Okay.
And the thing is that my parents weren't practicing, and my father was an astrophysicist, so our religion at home was science. So even though I'm a Jewish convert, when I was 16 and joined the church, I was converting away from a non-religious atmosphere in my home, or our religion is science, to the gospel. And then as I realized my heritage, then I learned more and more and more about Judaism, and then we went to live in Israel for 8 years. So
your parents had no objection to you joining the church?
Oh no, they objected.
Oh, they did object. Okay.
They did object, and what happened was, I started going to the ward with a friend, and had a spiritual manifestation the second I walked into the building. I had never had a spiritual experience before, and I received this overwhelming assurance that this was the place I needed to be for the rest of my life. And my parents hated the idea, and a couple of things made them acquiesce. One was I was already dating a boy in the ward, and they thought new boy, new church. This was just going to be temporary, and so while I was dating him, I'd be LDS, and then if I found a Methodist boy, I'd be Methodist, and that didn't work out according to their plan. And then, secondly, the word of wisdom and the moral code, they could see that I wasn't going to get into any serious trouble, and in fact, it was protective. So they acquiesce, but when you have parents who acquiesce like that and they haven't bought in to the situation, they get in the way of a lot of things. So learning about the church and becoming completely involved was very difficult until I went to BYU, and that they sent me to a University of California campus, which was probably the most difficult year of my life because of the immorality there. And then I lied to my parents and applied to BYU and didn't tell them till it was too late that I'd been accepted. And so then it was their choice to pay or not, and it's so cheap. So when I got up to BYU, then I could immerse and start learning how the church worked. I ended up with fabulous roommates, and so it was an opportunity to be in an LDS home and see how an LDS home functions. So that helped a lot.
Well, there's a difference between being religiously active and culturally active. So from the standpoint of your parents being Jewish, they celebrated the high holidays, or they didn't?
No, they didn't. When I was a young child, we lived in Washington, D.C., and my entire extended Jewish family was in the East. My father was a professor at Johns Hopkins University, and he was also a reserved lieutenant colonel in the Army, and he had been working on a special project that was joint between Johns Hopkins and the Applied Physics Laboratory in Pasadena, California. So when I was 8, we moved to California, and as soon as we got to California and there was no extended family around, all of our vestiges of Judaism disappeared. And so I remember in my early life going to Passovers at my relatives' homes, even though I didn't really understand. I remember going to a synagogue, but not often, just rarely. And then as soon as we got to California, my mother never wanted anyone to know that she was Jewish. And so my parents were what they call completely assimilated. My father really didn't believe in God. He was an atheist, essentially, and so there was nothing.
Oh. Now, your family goes back to Europe. Did you lose family in the Holocaust?
I did. Of course, my direct family came to the United States, and that's why we're all still alive. My German Jewish family, my mother's side, came really in the middle of the 18th century, and my direct ancestors settled in North Carolina and were conscripted into the Civil War. And so when you picture Confederate soldiers, you don't usually picture them only speaking Yiddish.
Right.
But that's what they were. And then others went to Philadelphia, New York. My mother's family, if anyone who's listening likes Raisinets or Goober's candy, they were invented by my mother's family, the Blumenthal brothers in Philadelphia. So they went into that business of flavorings and candy. My father's family got here later. They were Russian. They were from Ukraine. And they came in about 1914. And of course, the Eastern European Jews were the poor cousins of the German Jews who were established, doing very well, and everything. So by my father coming over as a Russian Jew, my family missed the Russian Revolution. They missed the starvation in Ukraine. So a huge blessing. Yes. By my mother's family coming over, of course, they missed the Holocaust. But I have aunts and uncles who were destroyed in the Holocaust.
Now, you wrote a book. Tell us about that.
So the book is Days of Awe, and I had studied Judaism quite intensely from the time I realized how Jewish I was. So about age 20. And then when I was 37, we moved to Israel, and we had 5 children at the time. We had our last one there in Jerusalem. And we couldn't afford to put them in private schools, so they were all in Hebrew schools, Israeli state schools, for the first 5 years that we were in Israel, and we were there about 8 years. And that was such a blessing in that when you celebrate holidays, the schools are really the center, and you really get to learn the traditions by helping your children through what they're doing in class. And Israelis, many of them are secular, the huge majority, but the holidays are really a big deal for everyone. No one ignores them, and God is everywhere. If there's a holiday, and let's say it's Rosh Hashanah, the New Year, what you're doing is you're repenting, and you're being, the wicked and the righteous are being separated, and you want your signature in the book of life. So everyone on the street, they don't say hello, they say good signature. Mm-hmm. And so all of those things permeate the society. So I learned a lot about the Jewish holidays, and of course because of my background as a Christian and as a Latter-day Saint, I could see this rich imagery of Christ in all of these holidays. And then I learned how Christ, when he served his mission, essentially, he used those holidays to teach people and to testify of himself. So let's say during the fall holidays, there's a water libation, and they light these huge torches, lamps on the Temple Mount. And he went up to the temple lamps and he said, "I'm the light." And by using the holiday of light and saying, "Focus this on me," people were converted. And then the water libation, he interrupted and said, "I'm the living water." And so the rabbis weren't very happy about it, but it was really a teaching moment for him. So this book is all of the Christ imagery in the holidays, and then how to teach and celebrate them yourself. So there's everything you need there to do your own Passover, whether you do a full meal of the Passover and teach your family, or you want to do a family home evening, or you want to teach it in church, have a little demonstration. And it's that way for all the holidays. There's recipes, everything, but everything about how they teach of Jesus Christ. And then we have latter-day fulfillments. So this is really, I'll tell you one that's just super interesting. There's the fall holidays and the spring holidays, and then in the middle there's a summer holiday. There's 7 festivals. And 3 times you go to the temple in ancient times. So there were 3 pilgrimages. In the spring there were 3 festivals that you just had to go once because they were all in 8 days. And in the fall, they were all in 8 days. They're kind of mirror image from each other and cut the year in half. So you would go up for those 3 fall holidays, and then you'd go for the middle one, the Feast of Weeks. And in the spring holidays, there's 3 festivals. There's the Passover, which is the sacrifice of the lamb, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which we all know the story, and then there's one more festival, and it's the first fruits offering. And what happened was the people who came to the festival brought grain with them. And they couldn't eat of the new harvest until this wave offering was made. And it guaranteed a perfect harvest until the next spring holiday came around. And then they could eat the new grain. And it's very interesting the way that this holiday is prescribed. Before the holiday comes, the high priest would create a field of barley next to the temple. And they were not allowed to water it, and they were not allowed to weed it. It just had to grow up unto itself. And then just before the wave offering, they would go down into this little field, and people would follow them to give their common consent to choosing the perfect sheaf of grain. And they would tie that, they would bind it with a cord, and then they would take that to the temple and offer it as this wave offering. And that occurs on what they do now is the 16th of Nisan. The Passover sacrifice is the 14th, and the Feast of Unleavened Bread starts the 15th, and then the wave offering is the 16th. But what it says, it's the first day after the Sabbath that occurs during the Passover week. The Jews have to argue about that because the first day of Passover is a Sabbath too. So essentially it was Sunday. It's the day after the Sabbath. So on the Sunday, they do this wave offering. It guarantees a perfect harvest, and that's the day that Christ was resurrected. So in the Kirtland Temple, Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery are there, and Christ appears, Moses appears, and Elijah appears, and Elias appears to give them all these keys, and it happens on this holiday that nobody even pays any attention to anymore because there's no temple to celebrate it, where this first fruits offering, and the name of the offering is called Honored Son. That day, all of these prophets appear to Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery, and so and then Joseph Smith gets the gold plates on the Jewish New Year, the Rosh Hashanah, and the Lord just keeps fulfilling things on these Jewish holidays.
Well, that's all very interesting. Now, you decided to go to Israel. What year was that?
It was 1983, and we stayed through the first Gulf War in 91, and we moved to Cyprus, the island of Cyprus, after the Gulf War.
Okay. Well, I was the founding member of the Jerusalem branch.
Really?
Yes.
That's great.
There was Ken Patey and Dan Rona.
Right.
You know Dan Rona quite well because you're with B'nai Shalom.
Yep.
And Dan Rona stayed with us either a month or 2 months until he found a place. And that was in our 1,400 square foot apartment.
And we stayed with them for 2.5 weeks when we first arrived in Israel. Yes.
And he found a place in Jerusalem. And so, like I said, we've got quite a bit in common here. And I lived in Israel for 4 years. I was with the Israel Philharmonic Orchestra.
Oh, really?
And I would have probably still been there.
I subscribed to their YouTube channel.
Yes. I would probably still be there if I was waiting to renew the contract for the second time, and there's a few things I wanted, and the board kept... It was a good tactic. They just kept delaying, thinking, okay. And I was getting ready to go to the United States for a tour. And if I went at that time, then anyway, it saved me some money if I was going to move back to the States. And so I remember being at the travel agency and calling them, and they said, I need to know, are you going to approve it or not? And they said, well, we're still thinking about it. I said, okay, well, the decision's been made. And so I moved back. But had they done that, most likely I would still be living there. My wife, Claudia, she has a tremendous knack for languages. She became fluent in Hebrew.
Wow.
And with an Israeli accent.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
My dream.
Yeah, when she was on the phone, people just assumed that she was an Israeli because
that's amazing.
Her accent was just perfect. And I got where I could converse in Hebrew, which sometimes got me into trouble because I misunderstood some things.
Yes, me too.
But I enjoyed the country, and now with all the bombings going on, they mention the cities, and I go, my gosh, well, I lived in Ramat Aviv, which is where the university was, Tel Aviv University. In fact, the university was, look out my window, and there it was. And I actually served on the National Guard. In fact, they're the first ones that introduced me to guns and shooting. And so after being with the orchestra, I think I did it once or twice a month. Every month I had a shift from 1 in the morning until 3 in the morning or something, and I'd walk the neighborhood. And nothing ever happened when I did it, so I assumed that I kept everybody safe.
Right.
We were there for the war, the Yom Kippur War. We were in Jerusalem for church.
Yeah.
And we had to stay with, I think we stayed with David Galbraith. You know David Galbraith. And we stayed with him until the roads were back open and we could go back. In fact, I remember we were in sacrament meeting and the sirens went off, and here it's Yom Kippur, and we're going, what is going on? I mean, David and everybody was just like,
how could this be happening?
Is there something? Is they running a test? Is this for real? And then, of course, we turned on the radio and found out that it was a real thing. So, and as an orchestra member, we played for all the injured soldiers, and during the war. And I asked about the Holocaust. One of our neighbors, she lost everybody.
Yeah.
She was the sole survivor. And of course, she had the numbers tattooed on her arm. And I learned so much from her because she acted like life is great.
Yeah.
And I just thought, you've lost everybody. And what you went through in the concentration camps, and yet you're smiling. So
yeah, and you know, everybody complains in Israel it's kind of a national pastime, but if you went to the grocery store and you'd pick up a can of tuna fish, and I think there were times when there weren't cans of tuna fish, you know, but you're coming from America and there's always tuna fish, you know, and you pick up a can of tuna fish and you're standing there and you say, oh my gosh, this is so expensive. And then someone's next to you with a tattoo on their arm, and you're so abashed, so embarrassed, so fast. It puts everything into perspective really quickly.
Well, I remember my wife, I was on, sometimes I'd be 12 weeks on tour, and we had 2 children at the time. And she says, there's been exciting news in the neighborhood. And I said, what is it? Well, we had a little local market, as most of the neighborhood did. And she says, all the Geverets, the women in the area, are so excited because there is actually a cake mix.
Yes.
A cake mix. And I said, well, what flavor? And she goes, just white cake, but you can add chocolate if you want to have a chocolate. And they were so excited that they could just get a box and take some water and maybe add an egg, and they were able to have cake. And I remember, Z-Bang. It was supposed to be like Comet to water, to clean the sink. It did no good. I think they just took a can of sand and added a little soap, and it never worked.
Product control was a big deal.
And then they had an American festival in Tel Aviv, in the main building, the tower there, and we went, and they had cans of Comet, and we bought as many cans as we could of Comet because
been there, done that.
It actually cleaned the sink. And we came back, and our neighbor said, "Why are you so excited about this? We've got a cleaner." I said, "Okay, take this can, go home and clean your sink." And they would come back so excited. "Oh my gosh, this is great."
Yeah, it's so true. We did all of that. Yeah, it's really
And
true.
then the bug spray. Of course, you always had cockroaches, and being in the desert and everything. And we used to tease that you would spray the cockroach and he'd just look at you and lap it up, and go, "Come on, I want some more. Give me some more." So whatever products they had weren't very good, and they didn't work very good. And
there was a toothpaste when we were there called Flirt, and of course that was spelled in Hebrew. And to me it tasted like a combination of like Dutch cleanser you use in your sink and peppermint, really strong peppermint. Yeah, the product control, but things just kept getting better, so...
Well, recently I had a nice experience. I've been wanting to make falafel. And at Trader Joe's, they have some falafel that's already made. It's not fried or anything. And I really don't want to fry the falafel. I prefer to bake it. But anyway, I always tell my wife today that if we ever go to Israel, we're going to go to Haifa. And there is the soul of falafel. There's one street where you can get falafel. In fact, the sidewalks are almost paved with falafel because it drops on the sidewalk.
Yeah.
And I said, it is so good. And I kept describing it. Well, the Trader Joe's is about the closest I've seen. And they even had a mix. And I thought, well, I've tried other mixes and they were kind of,
yeah.
And so I tried the mix and I said, this is getting close. I said, okay, what I need now is the falafel maker. The thing you put it over and throw it into the oil. Well, I found it.
Really?
Yes, I found it, and I found the exact size that they use in Israel. And when the package came, it was all in Hebrew.
Yes.
And I just enjoyed. Now, I can read Hebrew. I may not know what the word means, but I can read it.
Yes.
And so I actually downloaded into my phone a Hebrew-English translation app, so I can type in Hebrew and then it'll give me the English. So I said, well, what do they call this thing? And it's called a falafel maker. That's the translation. And so now I make my falafel, and I put it there and I drop it down, and of course I bake it instead of frying it. But I was so thrilled. And so when my wife came home, I said, this is what we had in Israel all the time. This was the packaging. And if you didn't know Hebrew, too bad.
Yeah.
And she knows the story that our oldest daughter was in Israel when she was, I think, 5. And so she attended the public schools, and her teacher that first year knew Hebrew and German. And if you didn't know one of those 2 languages, too bad. All the notices came from the school in Hebrew.
Yeah.
And so you had to learn Hebrew or just be in the dark. And so we had some wonderful experiences there. And I just enjoy the country. I enjoy the people. In fact, while I was there, most people assumed I was Jewish because my last name, Bernard, is a Jewish French name.
Yeah.
And I would have to explain, no, I'm not Jewish. But I still suspect, and I still haven't been able to get back far enough, that there is some Jewish line within me. Mm-hmm. I just don't know how much we're there, but I've always had this love for Israel.
Yeah.
It's innate in me. And when I had a chance to go live there for 4 years, I said, let's go, because it's a special country. It really is.
Yeah, and it's really funny when things get really bad like they are right now, you feel like running to the country.
I do.
It's like having a child. I mean, the worse things are, the more you feel like going to help. It's really interesting.
I used to tell my children, I said, if things really got bad in Israel and they needed soldiers, now I'm old, but at that age, I said, I'd go back.
Yeah.
Because I believe that much in it. And in fact, my 3rd son was born there, so he's got dual citizenship. And he never served in the Army. But I said, if you go back, they may grab you up.
Yeah, yeah. And that said, because we were LDS, we had the freedom to really get into Palestinian culture too, mm-hmm. and learn so much and have so many people that we love over there.
Yeah.
Who are Palestinian. And when people, ask me, are you pro-Israel, pro-Palestinian? I have to say, if you're not just pro-people, you're not doing it right.
Yeah.
You just have to be pro-people.
Yeah, I have to agree. I did learn to profile people when I was there. When I traveled with the orchestra, we were always with the secret police and being guarded because people wanted to kill us.
Yeah.
And usually most concerts started outside the country with, well, we've had bomb threats, we've gone through the building, the dogs have gone through the building, and if you want to leave, leave. Otherwise, no one ever left. And it's just very, very strange. And, David Galbraith had a woman that worked for him. David was exporting T-shirts that had fancy embroidery on it. Mm-hmm. And he told us a story of this woman. She literally lived in a cave, as you know. They're in Bethlehem, they're in that area. And she had no lighting in the cave. And she kept telling David she's saving her money, she's saving her money. And finally she wanted to show David, after about a year of saving money, what she bought. And he said, well, what is it? And he was just assuming she had arranged to have lighting put in the cave. And no, it was a necklace.
Right.
And then David explained, he said, well, it doesn't take much to be divorced as an Arab woman. Yeah. And you can be kicked out.
That's your savings.
It's what you got on your body that you can take with you. So that she was taking care of herself to be able to do that. In learning to profile, I still get uneasy when I see young Arab men.
Yeah.
It's just in me. I don't know if I can ever get rid of it. I know I should love them, and I do, but we were one time in California, and about 4 of them, probably about 25, and they were all speaking Arabic, and they just fit that profile.
Yeah.
And I couldn't believe the uneasiness that came over me. And yet they were harmless. They weren't doing anything. It's hard.
Yeah, but that it's really interesting that when you go into the West Bank or any Arab territory in Israel, they're very suspicious of each other.
Yes.
They know where people are from, who their families are, and you can't say Muhammad meet Ibrahim. And they'll say, oh, hi, it's good to know you, and shake hands. That doesn't happen.
Right.
They want to know who your family is, where you're from, and they're very suspicious of each other.
Yes.
And so, I think that runs through the society, at least there.
Well, I didn't ask you about when you graduated from BYU. What exactly did you graduate in?
In English.
In English. And you were saying that you were an English teacher.
Yes, high school English teacher.
Yeah. How many
Shortest person in all my classes.
And what in high school? What age were you teaching?
Everybody. I had 6 or 7 preparations.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I taught 6 different classes, and they were all unique. So, it was interesting.
Well, being a teacher myself, I know what that means. That was a
lot
of
of preparation.
Yeah.
Yes.
How many years did you teach?
In public school, only 1. Then I taught in private schools, and then I taught all the years that we lived abroad in informal situations. Taught ESL in Israel, and that was a lot of fun too. And then just always worked with the schools my kids were in.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. And as an English teacher, I know I said something that English was not my subject.
Right.
I certainly struggled with it and everything, but and I used to interpret. I'm fluent in American Sign Language, and I used to interpret at the junior colleges for the ESL classes. Mm-hmm. I learned a lot.
Yeah,
there were some things that they were teaching, and I'm interpreting, and I'm going, I didn't know that. I got to stop my hand so I can make a note here. I learned a lot from that, just being in an ESL class, because they approached English in a very different way than they approached it in high school.
I had a little fun experience with ASL. We went to a concert at a high school years ago, and it was presented by a deaf troupe of actors. Oh. And they danced, they did all kinds of things. And after the program was sensational. After it was over, people were leaving the auditorium, but there were little conversation groups around the auditorium, but very far apart. But because you're speaking with your hands, you can eavesdrop.
Yes. So
people were leaning around their group, eavesdropping on someone way across the auditorium to essentially listen to what they were signing.
Yes.
It's hard to keep a secret.
Yes, it is. In fact, what happens between husbands and wife, they develop their own little secret language. And that's why, as an interpreter, there are 6 modes of communication within ASL, and one is public, for example, and one is intimate. And so it's possible that you can see a conversation going and see the signs, but it's not making sense because the husband and wife have developed these signs that they know what they're doing. Or I've seen people kind of get in a corner with another person and turn their back on everybody, and that's how they have their private conversation.
That's tough.
But I love American Sign Language because my wife can be across the room and she knows some, because we actually attended deaf branches here in the United States for close to 20 years. And I can sign something, and I don't have to yell at her or something. And it's just it's a wonderful, exciting language. But yes, it's a unique language. For example, it's okay to talk and eat.
Yeah, that's right.
And in English, you don't do that, but you can be signing and talking and chewing at the same time, and it's got a lot of advantages to it. Well, getting into the scriptures, what is your approach of the scriptures? And I know that before we started, you alluded to that you've been teaching the gospel doctrine classes for quite a few years. And what is your approach within the gospel doctrine?
Well, with Bible, I have a lot to offer in putting context to the scriptures, because it's very difficult to be in our present day in a Western society to understand the Old Testament and the New Testament. And so having lived in Israel, knowing where all the places are that they're talking about, understanding some Hebrew, and understanding just their society and their traditions and everything, I'm able to kind of set the stage for the things that are happening and how people felt, and to bring meaning to things that are usually hard to understand, especially in Old Testament, Old Testament is easy for me, and even Isaiah is very comfortable. And I think part of it is having a Jewish mind, which is unique. It's genetic. It's not something you can learn or adapt. And And so I think that's really a big calling, is to add context and understanding to the Bible. In the Book of Mormon, I see it as a Jewish scripture, and it's really easy to see if you're familiar with Jewish culture and tradition and the Mosaic Law and all of that. And it really helps to prove the Book of Mormon is true when you see those things that Joseph Smith could not possibly have known. And then, in the Doctrine and Covenants, I don't know that I have any advantage, except that there are many commandments from the Lord in the Doctrine and Covenants that are straight out of the Law of Moses, and that's kind of interesting to bring into.
You mentioned the Book of Mormon. Quite often I will look up a word not in English, but what it was in Hebrew in the Old Testament, and what was the meaning of that. Of course, I use Strong's Concordance and things like that, but quite often it enlightens me to what that verse is really about.
Yeah, and the Hebrew translation is often so much different than what we get and what we understand. There is a new translation. I don't remember the first name of this scholar. His last name is Alter, and he translated it from scratch from the Hebrew, and it's quite a bit different than any translation that we have. And I'd love to buy it. It's expensive. There's one thing that is really valuable from the scriptures that I like to teach, and I'd love to get it out to millions of people. I wrote about it on Third Hour, which is one of our websites, and the article I wrote is Perfection is Not What You Think It Is. And I think this is so important for Latter-day Saints because we're so diligent, we have so much work to do. Because we have a lay clergy, we all have callings, and so we're very busy. And I think that we tend to feel like we're slackers or we're not doing very well in the Lord's eyes when we aren't fulfilling our checklists. And I think that's tempting for everyone, but especially for Latter-day Saints, where industriousness is such an important part of our tradition. And when Jesus was teaching the people, he said, "Be thou therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect." And he didn't say much more about that. He didn't elaborate.
No, he didn't.
And the reason he didn't elaborate was because everybody got it. And that's really interesting, because we don't get it, because of our Western orientation and the history of our faith. The Jews had a tradition already of what perfection was, and it comes from the Law of Moses and Jewish mysticism, and it goes way, way back to King Solomon and King David, and even before that. And so when he said, "Be thou therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect," the people instantly understood what he was talking about because of their background. And what they understood was to have the attributes of God. And there are 7. There are 3 that are the prime attributes, and there are 7 that are all of the attributes. And so when we think of being perfect, instead of visualizing a checklist, you have to visualize these attributes and check and see whether you're becoming a person who has those attributes. So the 3 main attributes are love, justice, and mercy. So at the end of your day, and you're thinking, "Oh my gosh, I didn't do my ministering. I was going to call so-and-so, and then I wasn't patient with my kids because I had this other thing to do for primary." When you review your day, were you loving? Were you loving to everyone, or were you selective? Were you inclusive of all of Heavenly Father's children and creations in the way that you loved? And our goal really is to love like Heavenly Father loves, is to have that pure charity of Jesus Christ, and develop that pure love that loves everything that God has created and everyone that God has created equally. So was I loving today? And then was I fair? Was I just? And that's, when you review your day and you think of, let's see, I was in the supermarket and there was only 1 apple left. and I went a little faster so I could grab it before someone else. Those kinds of things. Was I fair? Was I just? When I was at the Little League baseball game, was I fair? And then mercy. Was I merciful today? Instead of what did I get done? Was I loving? Was I just? Was I merciful? And then the other 4 attributes are really, really surprising. And they take a lot of introspection and thought that I hope that people, when they learn these, they'll do that. The first of those is prophecy, which is a surprise, isn't it? An attribute of God is prophecy. And for us, that's the testimony of Jesus Christ and the sensitivity to the Spirit, to live by the Spirit and understand the Spirit and know when the Spirit is guiding us are really our main task while we're here on the earth. And then the next trait is priesthood. And that's another surprise. And you start to realize what the temple is doing for us when you start to hear these other attributes. Do we have the priesthood power, and how do we exercise it? How do we hold it? What is it doing for us in our lives? And recently, the prophet and all of our leaders have had us, men and women, they have urged us to study what the priesthood does for us, and what our power is, and what our understanding is, and what the gifts are that come with the priesthood. And the next attribute is kingship. Another surprise. And there you go to the temple again. What are the promises in the temple? If you overcome the world and you become co-heirs with Christ, you're crowned with this royalty, and we need to learn about it and understand it. But we can see that the gifts of the temple are to give us these attributes and for us to nurture. And then the last one is enduring to the end. So the Lord is the same yesterday, today, and forever, in that he has these attributes that are always perfectly exercised. And for us to endure in righteousness is that last attribute. How are we doing on that journey? So this is a message that all Christ had to say was, be therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. And the people understood exactly what he was talking about, because that's such a strong, ancient Jewish tradition. And so actually he was being repetitive to them. They understood what he was saying, whether they were faithful or not, whether they were there for the loaves and fishes or not. They understood what he was saying.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I was thinking of the Greek word in that verse. That's Matthew 5:48, is teleos, and it means, one of the definitions in Greek is to be complete.
Exactly.
Yes. And that's what you're talking about, is being complete within those 7 attributes. And what I've always found interesting is that he doesn't mention himself as being complete or perfect at that point. It's only in 3rd Nephi, something happened after his death and resurrection that he said, be ye therefore perfect, even as I, or my Father in heaven, is perfect.
Right. Well, he had to go through the resurrection to be perfect in those attributes, as his Father is, and we will too. I mean, those attributes aren't perfect until we're exalted, but that's what we should be working on earth, is not our checklist that makes us sad. It makes us unhappy. And when you talk about perfection being completeness, that's exactly what it is. Tom is one of the words for wholeness, and when we talk about that sign of Satan, that 666, it's never getting to 7, which is the holy number.
That's right.
It's the week without the Sabbath. It's ever and eternally incomplete. And so this completeness and this wholeness are the wholeness of these attributes that we need to.
Yeah, and you mentioned the number of the 7. Of course, living in Israel, you talked about the mysticism there in Israel, and with the numerology and everything. And 7 is that complete number.
Right.
And 6 is not.
It just never gets there.
You haven't quite completed. And so, yes, and of course it's interesting you tie in the 7 attributes into that, into the 7. Well, you individually, when you study the scriptures, do you use hard copy? You digital? What do you use?
I use both. I mean, I use everything I can get at my disposal. And people sometimes ask me, because I seem to know a lot, and part of that is because I'm just really, really old. And so I've had a lot of time to study things. And being a teacher for decades, I've taught CES classes and gospel doctrine for a long time. You prepare because you're teaching, and you learn. You're the one who gets the most out of it.
Absolutely.
Because you learn so much when you're studying to teach. But I have to tell people that the Institute manuals are amazing. They're so good, and to either study them digitally or to get your own copies and mark them up. They're just really reliable resources when you're studying the gospel. And then in the Bible, now I'm trying to remember his name. He wrote the intertestamental period, and he's Jewish. Who is it? Help me think of what his name is.
Avram?
No, it's not Gileadi. It's we have to figure it out.
Okay.
And put a link.
Okay, I'll put
He
a
wrote a
link
book
in.
on the intertestamental period, and that was a long time, 400 years. And when you think of how much our world has changed in 400 years, we go right from the Old Testament to the New Testament, and we don't even study what happened or know what happened between those times. So when we're going from Old Testament to New Testament, I always give a fireside on the intertestamental period and show how the lives of Jews and Israelites had changed in that 400 years. Their language changed, everything changed. And it's just really important to understanding the world that Christ came into, and understanding that world is a huge advantage when you learn about the Savior.
I'm not familiar with that book. I'm going to have to look it up and read it.
I've got to remember his name.
I'll be able to Google it. We'll find it.
Yeah.
And I'll include it in the show notes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yes, now there's that 400 years and things do change. And language changes.
Yeah.
It's a dynamic thing. It's like, when in First Nephi, the very first verse, I have been born of goodly parents. Well, I spent literally hours researching goodly. I tried to find equivalents up to it in the Hebrew and the Greek, and I went to etymologies and defined it, and I found it had a lot of meaning. That most likely it meant his parents were highly respected within the community. And of course we know his father was quite wealthy.
Yes.
And usually when you have wealth, people in the community look up to you. And so and the next part, Nephi having been born of goodly parents, therefore I was taught somewhere in learning my father. And I figured, why did he put that in? Well, I did research and found that if they went to school, in fact, the literacy rate was about 99%.
Yeah.
Or illiteracy rate. And and if they did go to school, the boys learned about farming, and the girls learned about marriage and things like that, and divorce and things like that. But this is why in the New Testament the Savior always said, "And thus you have heard."
Yeah.
He never said, "And thus you have read,"
yeah.
because they didn't read. Everything was just spoken. And so as I put all that together, I go, well, yes, his parents were wealthy. They were able to send him to school. I'm sure his father did do some teaching, but his father most likely was gone a lot. And so this is what that verse means. And so I put that in the notes in the Gospel Library, a section like this, on how I came to that conclusion. And then I even looked at the 1828 Webster's Dictionary, and what goodly meant at that time of Joseph Smith. But words have meaning.
Yeah.
I remember, this is years ago, when Rush Limbaugh, who's passed away last year, but Rush Limbaugh, I listened to him on radio when I was in sales, and many times he says words have meaning. And it seems words do have meaning, but that's not what he meant. That words really do have meaning.
Yeah.
And when you pick one word to describe somebody as opposed to another word, there's meaning in that.
Right.
And so we find that in the Old Testament and the New Testament and in the choice of words. I've been struggling recently with the Savior talks about someone having exceeding faith. Well, if they've got exceeding faith, then there has to be degrees of faith. There's got to at least be an opposite of that, because if someone is the top, there's got to be a bottom. And so I keep going, well, what does it take to have exceeding faith? And what's the bottom line of that? And so I think this is what you're talking about, that it's understanding these. And as an English teacher, words are important to you.
Yeah. And it is interesting to read the Bible, and especially the New Testament, and see where the apostles are making cultural judgments, where they're not revealing the Word of God, but they're just making cultural judgments. Mm-hmm. And you do see that in the Doctrine and Covenants too, where you can discern the difference in the voice of Christ and the voice of Joseph Smith. It's easy to see when Joseph Smith is speaking and when Christ is speaking.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, is there anything else in your scripture study that you do?
I read the Book of Mormon every day. And then I study and whatever other scripture we're studying. And then I'll add another one sometimes. I read commentaries. I do a lot of studying, and I read a lot of articles about how the gospel works in people's lives. I think that's one of the there are basic things that we learn while we're here in mortality, and one is to discern the Spirit. And another is to understand how the Lord works in people's lives. And that's a long learning process, that one. And sometimes we have to go through certain bitter trials to see how the Lord works. And sometimes we give up because he's not working in the way that we thought he should. But there's a lot of learning to do. So I can't even imagine not reading the Book of Mormon every day. And I get through it twice in a year. And then I read whatever other scriptures we're studying, and of course prepare to teach.
Now, do you keep a journal as you're studying? What do you do there?
I keep a journal anyway, but I don't keep a study journal necessarily. Because I'm teaching so much, I have my lesson plans, and those lesson plans always include insights that I've received through inspiration while I've been preparing. And so my teaching notes are essentially my study journal.
Now, what do you do in the ward now? Are you teaching?
I'm a gospel doctrine teacher.
You are the gospel doctrine teacher now. I know you talked about it in the past, but
I really feel sorry for bishops and leaders in the wards that I've been in, because I have held them at ransom quite often. I mean, like when we got to this ward, I said, we're trying to decide on a house to buy, and we'll get one in your neighborhood if I can be a gospel doctrine teacher. And then I was released as a gospel doctrine teacher once, and I was so mad. There wasn't any reason for it. I wasn't being called to anything else. It was just a release, and I thought maybe I was doing something wrong. And when the poor counselor in the bishopric who was releasing me, I was saying, I want you to know that I accept this release under duress, that I don't agree with it. He had one hand on the doorknob ready to flee. And so, I really feel sorry for the leaders in the wards I've been in, because I can hardly stand not to be a gospel doctrine teacher. I feel, when I'm not teaching, I feel lost and like I'm not complete. It's just so much a part of me to teach that I have to be doing it all the time.
Now, have you taught younger ages?
Oh yeah, everybody.
Okay.
So yeah.
So you've done the primary route, and
yeah,
I taught primary for 13 years.
Yeah.
So that the young, and I like teaching the youth, the teenage years.
I do too. I'm really best after 12.
Okay.
Age 12.
Yeah, I would agree with you that. I don't know if I was the greatest 6-year-old teacher, because I want to get more in the scriptures, and I've got to stay this very basic thing with them. But I agree. I like it when they're older, and we can that's the age where you can start reasoning a little bit.
Right.
You know, you can say, why did the Savior say this word and not this word?
Right.
And things like that. So I really like that. Well, Gail, I've really enjoyed the time with you.
Well, so have I.
It's been great. I'm almost going to self-invite myself when you have Passover. Give me a call.
Yeah, I don't know when we'll do it again. It's COVID has really interrupted a lot. We missed two.
Because I'd love having my wife to experience a real Passover. I always enjoyed the Jewish holidays.
No, they're wonderful.
I always
Jewish holidays
them.
are the best.
And I enjoyed them. I know this sounds terrible, but I enjoyed them more than Christmas.
Yeah, and I do too, and I hope that we celebrate the Jewish holidays during the millennium. And we should, because it's the whole round of the gospel is there.
Yeah.
And so...
I don't know. Christmas has become so commercialized. And it destroys it.
I do love Christmas, but the symbolism of all of the Jewish holidays, and when we're in the millennium, all the imagery will be complete. Yeah. Well, it'll be marvelous.
And it's even like celebrating Sukkot or things like that, you know. And
Sukkot is wonderful.
And most likely when King Benjamin was giving his talk, that's what was happening.
Yes, yeah.
That's most likely what was going on. And so now I enjoy the Jewish holidays, and I just I miss them. And you're right, the whole country just celebrates. They may not be actively religious, but it's the culture.
Yes, it's wonderful.
And they do it. Maybe Passover is just the time that all the family gets together and enjoy each other, but they go through the ritual of it. But I really enjoy it. So anyway, I'm going to self-invite myself anytime you want me to come to Passover.
Sounds good.
You got my phone number. You can give me a call. And I didn't say anything, but I literally live 6 minutes from here.
Oh, really?
You're in an Ivory home.
Yeah.
And we're on the Ivory homes on the other side by the lake.
Oh, yeah.
So if you go down 500 South and keep going till it ends, there's my home.
Amazing.
And so we are neighbors, and yet we have so much in common because of Israel and people like David Galbraith and Dan Ronan and things like that. So, and we both lived in Israel for a while, so it's been great. So anyway, it's really been wonderful with you. And I always ask my guests at the end if they would mind bearing their testimony.
I'd love to bear my testimony. We have B'nai Shalom, which is a group of Jewish converts and people who are interested in both the gospel, Latter-day Saint gospel, and Judaism. And once they find the church, they find that Judaism is embraced in the gospel of Jesus Christ as we teach it in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, because we have the whole circle, and we have the Aaronic and the Melchizedek. No other church can offer that kind of fulfillment and restoration of all of Judaism. And so for me, it's been so rich. And I knew the second I walked into that building, the church meeting house, when I was 16, that the church was true. And I didn't know anything about it. It was just that Heavenly Father revealed to me that this is the place. When I read the Book of Mormon, I had another experience, and I continue to have it every time I read it. And I can read the Bible, and I've read the Bible many times. I'm well versed in the Bible, but it doesn't give me the same spiritual dose as the Book of Mormon does. Even as much as I honor and love the Bible, the Spirit is so much fuller in the Book of Mormon that I can't miss a day without reading it. I've been able to realize all of the blessings of the church through the priesthood of my husband, through the temple blessings, and I know this is the place. This is the only place where the fullness exists. And I thank God every day that He led me to the church. Everything good in my life, and I'm 75 now. You can't tell because you're just listening, and my voice hasn't gotten too aged yet. But every good thing in my life since I converted to the church at 16 is because of the gospel. And if you're wondering about whether there's worth here, and you're thinking of going somewhere else, don't go. This is the place. It really is.